When Emma's cruel stepmother forced her to marry a poor dwarf out of spite, she thought her life was ruined forever. But sometimes the worst punishment becomes the greatest gift. Sometimes true love hides in the most unexpected places, waiting to teach us what real happiness means. Before watching full story, comment below from where you're watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Emma was only 8 years old when her mother died. Her father had passed away 2 years before, leaving her with only memories of warm hugs and bedtime stories. Now she lived with her stepmother, Margaret, in the same house that once felt like home but had become cold and empty. Margaret was a tall woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She had married Emma's father for his money and property, not for love. When he died, she was left with his debts and a young girl she never wanted. Margaret spent her days counting coins and complaining about everything. She made Emma do all the cooking, cleaning, and washing while she sat in the parlor, dreaming of better days. "Emma, the floor isn't clean enough. Do it again," Margaret would shout from her chair. Emma would quietly pick up the mop and start over. She had learned not to argue. Arguments only made things worse. Years passed this way. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, despite all the hardship. She had her mother's soft brown hair and her father's patient nature. But Margaret saw only a burden, someone who ate her food and wore her clothes. When Emma turned 18, Margaret's jealousy grew stronger. Men in the village would tip their hats to Emma when she went to market. They would smile at her kindness when she helped carry heavy bags for elderly neighbors. Margaret noticed these things and felt angry inside. "She thinks she's so special," Margaret would mutter to herself. "With her pretty face and sweet voice. She needs to learn her place in this world." One morning, Margaret called Emma to the parlor. Emma wiped her hands on her apron and hurried downstairs, wondering what chores awaited her today. "Sit down, Emma," Margaret said with a cold smile. "I have important news." Emma sat on the edge of a worn chair, her hands folded in her lap. "You're getting married," Margaret announced. Emma's heart jumped. "Married? To whom?" "To Thomas the dwarf. He lives in the small cottage by the forest. He's asked for your hand and I've said yes." Emma felt the world spin around her. Thomas was known in the village as a kind man, but he was very poor and quite small. She had nothing against him personally, but this felt wrong. She had dreamed of marrying someone she loved, someone who would love her back. "But I don't know him well," Emma said quietly. "And I don't love him." Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. "Love? What does a girl like you know about love? Thomas has offered what little money he has for you. That's more than you deserve. You'll marry him next month and that's final." Emma felt tears burning her eyes, but she held them back. She knew Margaret had made this decision to hurt her. Thomas was a good man, but he was poor, and Margaret hoped this marriage would make Emma miserable forever. "You'll live in his tiny cottage and learn what real work means," Margaret continued with satisfaction. "No more dreaming about handsome princes or fancy dresses. This is your reality, girl." That night, Emma cried herself to sleep. She felt trapped, like a bird in a cage with no way out. The wedding was small and simple. Emma wore her mother's old dress, which she had mended and cleaned as best she could. Thomas stood at the altar in his best clothes, which were patched but clean. He was indeed quite short, barely reaching Emma's shoulder, but his eyes were kind and his face was honest. During the ceremony, Emma could barely speak her vows. She felt ashamed and hopeless. All her dreams seemed to be crumbling around her. Thomas, however, spoke his vows clearly and looked at her with respect. After the ceremony, Margaret pulled Emma aside. "Remember where you belong now," she whispered with a mean smile. "In that little cottage with your little husband. Don't come crying to me when you realize what you've given up." Thomas had borrowed a small cart to take Emma to their new home. As they rode through the village, Emma felt everyone's eyes on them. Some people looked curious, others seemed to pity her. She kept her head down and tried not to cry. The cottage was indeed small, but it was clean and tidy. Thomas had prepared it carefully for her arrival. There were fresh flowers on the table and clean sheets on the bed. The windows sparkled and everything had its proper place. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Thomas said gently as they stood in the doorway. "But I promise to treat you with kindness and respect. I won't force you to love me, but I hope we can at least be friends." Emma was surprised by his words. She had expected him to be demanding or cruel like Margaret. Instead, he seemed genuinely concerned about her feelings. The first weeks of marriage were awkward and quiet. Emma did her household duties, and Thomas went to work each day as a carpenter. He was skilled with his hands and took pride in his craft, even though he earned very little money. Emma noticed small things about Thomas that surprised her. He always said please and thank you. He never raised his voice or made demands. When she cooked, he praised her efforts even when the food wasn't perfect. When she looked sad, he would quietly leave small gifts for her, a pretty stone, a flower, or a piece of wood he had carved into a beautiful shape. One evening, Emma was sitting by the window, feeling lonely and thinking about her mother. Thomas came home from work and saw her tears. "What troubles you?" he asked softly, sitting in the chair across from her. "I miss my mother," Emma admitted. "She used to brush my hair and tell me stories." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Would you like me to brush your hair?" Emma was startled. No one had offered to do such a thing since her mother died. She nodded hesitantly. Thomas was gentle and careful. His small hands moved the brush through her hair with patience and kindness. As he worked, he told her stories about the forest, about the animals he saw on his way to work, and about the beautiful things he noticed each day. Emma found herself relaxing for the first time in years. When he finished, she turned to look at him. "Thank you," she said, and she really meant it. As weeks turned into months, Emma began to see Thomas differently. She noticed how hard he worked, even though his job was difficult and the pay was small. She saw how he helped their elderly neighbor carry water from the well. She watched him feed stray cats and birds, sharing his own small portions of food. Thomas never complained about his size or his poverty. Instead, he found joy in simple things. He would point out beautiful sunsets, laugh at funny bird songs, and create little wooden toys for the village children. Emma started to appreciate these things too. She began to look forward to their evening conversations. Thomas was well-read and intelligent. He had taught himself to read by borrowing books from the village priest. He shared interesting stories and ideas with her. "You're much smarter than people realize," Emma told him one evening. Thomas smiled. "Size and wealth don't measure a person's mind or heart," he said. "I've learned that wisdom comes from watching, listening, and caring about others." Emma realized he was right. She had been so focused on what Thomas lacked that she hadn't seen what he possessed. He had qualities that many tall, rich men in the village didn't have: kindness, patience, wisdom, and genuine concern for others. 6 months after the wedding, Margaret came to visit. She arrived in a fancy carriage she had rented, wearing new clothes she could barely afford. She wanted to see Emma's misery with her own eyes. But when she saw Emma, Margaret was shocked. Emma looked healthy and happy. Her eyes sparkled with life and she moved with confidence. The cottage was beautifully decorated with Thomas's wood carvings and Emma's needlework. Everything was simple but lovely. "So this is how you live," Margaret said with disappointment. She had expected to find Emma broken and defeated. "Yes," Emma replied with a genuine smile. "We're very happy here." Margaret looked around the small cottage with disgust. "Happy? In this tiny place, with him?" She pointed at Thomas, who was working quietly at his carving table. "Thomas is a wonderful husband," Emma said firmly. "He's kind, intelligent, and caring. I've learned more about life from him than I ever knew before." Margaret couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You've lost your mind, girl. You could have had so much more." Thomas looked up from his work. "With respect, madam," he said calmly, "what is more? A bigger house that feels empty? Expensive clothes that don't warm the heart? Money that can't buy love or peace?" Margaret stared at him with anger. She had no answer because she knew he was right. Her own life, with all her schemes for wealth and status, had brought her no happiness at all. "You'll regret this," she told Emma before leaving. "When you're old and poor, you'll remember what you gave up." After Margaret left, Emma felt sad for her stepmother. "She doesn't understand," Emma told Thomas. "She thinks happiness comes from things you can buy." "She's afraid," Thomas replied wisely. "People who have never known real love are always afraid of losing what little they have. They can't see that true wealth comes from sharing life with someone who cares about you." That night, Emma realized something that surprised her. She was truly happy. More than that, she had fallen in love with her husband. Not because he was handsome or rich, but because of who he was inside. She loved his gentle nature and quick mind. She loved how he saw beauty in simple things and found joy in helping others. She loved his patience, his honesty, and his strength of character. She had discovered that a person's worth had nothing to do with their size or wealth. The next morning, Emma took Thomas's hands in hers. "I have something to tell you," she said. Thomas looked concerned. "What is it?" "I love you," Emma said simply. "I truly love you, not just as a friend or companion but as my husband. You've shown me what real love means." Thomas's face lit up with joy. "And I have loved you from the moment I first saw your kindness to others in the village," he confessed. I hoped someday you might see past my appearance to my heart. They embraced, and Emma felt complete for the first time since her parents died. She had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of someone who truly valued her. Emma and Thomas lived happily together for many years. They never became wealthy, but their life was rich with love, laughter, and friendship. Thomas's carpentry business grew as people recognized his skill and honesty. Emma became known in the village for her kindness and wisdom. They helped their neighbors during difficult times, shared their small home with those who needed shelter, and raised several orphan children as their own. Their cottage became a place where people came for advice, comfort, and good conversation. Emma often thought about how wrong her first impressions had been. She had judged Thomas by his size and wealth, just as others had judged her by her circumstances. She learned that true beauty, the kind that matters, comes from inside a person. Margaret, meanwhile, grew old alone in her big house. She had spent her life chasing wealth and status but had never found happiness. Sometimes she would see Emma in the village, surrounded by friends and children, and feel a strange emptiness in her chest. One day near the end of her life, Margaret came to Emma's cottage. She was sick and had no one to care for her. Without hesitation, Emma took her in and nursed her back to health. "Why are you helping me?" Margaret asked weakly. "I was so cruel to you." "Because it's the right thing to do," Emma replied simply. "And because I learned from my husband that kindness is always the right choice, no matter what someone has done to you." Margaret lived her final years in peace, finally understanding what Emma had discovered long ago, that love, kindness, and compassion are worth more than all the gold in the world. Emma and Thomas grew old together, surrounded by love and respect. Their story became a legend in the village, told to young people as an example of how true happiness is found not in appearances or wealth, but in the goodness of the heart. Emma often told the children, "Don't judge people by what they look like or what they own. Look at how they treat others, how they face difficulties, and what kind of person they choose to be. That's where you'll find their true worth." And Thomas would add with a smile, "The heart that sees true beauty will always find it, no matter where it's hidden." Their love story proved that sometimes the most unlikely matches make the happiest marriages, and that real treasure isn't found in gold or jewels, but in the simple joy of being understood, valued, and loved for exactly who you are.